my name is Katie. Welcome to my channel, Duck Potatoes World. Today we are going to just have a crash course in chart reading. So chart reading 101. So here I have a chart and I have a swatch that I knit from this chart. And I want you to notice a couple of things. For one thing, my chart looks square, but you notice that my swatch is definitely not. That is because stitches tend to be wider than they are tall. I kind of have that problem sometimes too. But just keep that in mind. Your piece may not have the same proportions as your chart. Depends on how the chart was made. So don't be surprised. And then I also want you to notice that when I'm looking at the swatch, what I'm looking at is the right side of my work because this is a flat piece of knitting. And when I'm looking at the chart, I'm looking at the right side of the work. So you can see how they match. You can see here is a cable in the middle. There's my cable in the middle. I have purl bumps before and after my cable. There's my before purl bump. He's kind of hiding, but there's my after purl bump. I have a column of twisted stitches on each side. That's represented here. All of this is garter stitch. You can see my garter stitch border. So when I'm looking at the chart, it's the same as if I'm looking at the front of my work. Now for starters, we're going to talk about using charts for flat knitting. And then we'll talk about how it's a little different if you're knitting in the round. For flat knitting, you are knitting back and forth. So when I knit my first row, I'm going to be looking at one side of my work, and then I'm going to turn it to knit the next row, and I'll be looking at the other side. And then I'm going to turn it, and I'll be looking at the back side, and then I'm going to be turning it, and I'll be looking at the front side. Well, my swatch turns back and forth, but my chart, I'm always looking at the front side of my chart. So it's important to make sure that you are reading the chart correctly. The first thing you want to notice is where is the numbers. So you see I have numbers across the top and bottom. These are giving me a stitch count, so I can tell I need to cast on 15 stitches in this chart. Then I have numbers going up the sides, and there's odd numbers on the left for this chart and even numbers on the right. So you want to look and see where your number 1 is. Here's my number 1. So numbers on this side are the wrong side of my work, and numbers on this side are the right side of my work. So which side of the columns the odd numbers are is going to tell me if row 1 is wrong side row or an even right side row. So my numbers are over here on the left, so therefore my first row is going to be a wrong side row. If the number 1 was over here, then my first row would be a right side row. I get this confused all the time, so this is an important concept to get down. It will save you a lot of headache later. Trust me on that one. When you read your chart, you're always reading wrong side rows from left to right and right side rows from right to left. So since my chart has the first row on the wrong side, I'm going to read this first row this direction. Now this is an easy row because I can come up here and look at my key. If there's a dot on the wrong side, I'm going to knit. So this is telling me to knit all the way across. So that's my first row. Right here, knit all the way across. Then I'm going to turn my work, and I'm now looking at the right side. I'm on row 2. Row 2 is my first right side row. I'm going to read it this direction, and it says right side knit. So again, I'm going to knit all the way across, and that was row 2. I'll turn my work, knit all the way across for row 3. Turn my work, knit all the way across for row 4. Turn my work. For row 5, this is the first time we have something different. I'm going to knit, because that's what this symbol means on the wrong side, 3, and then I'm going to purl 2, and you can see where my garter stitch is, and here's where it changes. You can see those purl bumps. I'm going to purl through the back loop. That's what this means. Purl 3, purl through the back loop, purl 2, knit 3. Turn my work. For row 6, I'm going to knit all the way to the twisted stitch, twist 1, knit 1, purl 1. You can see it, it's kind of hiding under the cable, but there's that purl right there. Knit, twist, knit. Turn my work. You get the idea. So odd rows we're going to read this direction. Even rows we're going to read this direction. So there's my cable. Knowing which direction you're reading the chart and where your right side and your wrong side are, half the battle. Once you get used to that, the rest is a breeze. Now, in order to help keep things straight in my mind, I also will often use a highlighter or a colored pencil or something like that to color my charts. So for example, in this chart, there's not a whole lot that really is going to be confusing for me. It's a very simple chart. But one thing that does get confusing for me is this symbol is not one I see very often in the charts that I tend to knit. And so I'm going to want to remember on the right side to knit through the back loop, and on the wrong side, I want to remember to purl through the back loop. So what I may do is I may come over here, row 5 is the wrong side, I'm going to purl through the back loop on this row, and I'm going to knit through the back loop here. This will just help remind me if I'm knitting or purling that stitch. If I have a lot of cables, a lot of times I will also highlight each different cable a different color, just so that instead of having to really look at the symbol so much, I can just look at the color and know which one it is. This chart only has one cable, so that's really not as important of a thing for me. Another thing I want to point out is how I keep track of where I'm at. So I have this handy little ruler that my friend gave me, and I like it a lot. It's great for charts. And the way that I do that is I cover all of the rows I have not knit yet, and then I work the first row. When I've done the first row, I'll lift this up and work the second row. When I've done the second row, I will move up and knit the third row. And the reason I move up is because this is how your knitting is going to move. As you knit the first row and the second row and the third row, this is like your needle, and here's your knitting growing, you know, as you go up off your needle. This way, what you see under your ruler or your marker is what you're also seeing under your needle. So it kind of lines up. And you don't have to use something this fancy. Sometimes I just use a plain old plastic ruler. That works too. I also have highlighter tape. I like to use this. This tape will stick on the paper and then come off and can be moved up as I read the chart. Good old-fashioned Post-it notes. They work great for this kind of thing too. You can mark your rows that way. You can also, depending on the kind of chart and how much reusing of it you think you're going to have to do, another good idea is the engineering method of checking work. So you circle the one that you're on, cross it off when it's done, and circle the next one. When it's done, cross it off and circle the new one when you start it. That way you always know that the row circled is the one that you're on, and when you're done, you mark it as done. You can work your way up that. That actually works also for written patterns. If you know I'm on row 1, I'm finished with 1, I'm on row 2, I'm finished with 2, I'm on row 3, I finished with 3, I'm on row 4. It's just a great way to help keep track of where you're at in your pattern. Now, I did tell you that that is flat knitting instructions right there. It is a little bit different if you are knitting in the round, because when you are knitting flat, like I said, you're flipping your work and looking at the back side, front side, back side. But when you're knitting in the round, you are always looking at the right side. So in a round knitting chart, your first row is always going to be a right side row, which means your number 1 is going to be over here on the right. Easy to remember. The right side is the side with the number 1, and your wrong side is going to be over here, except that in flat knitting you don't have a wrong side, right? Because you're always going around in a spiral. So you'll knit row 1, like if this was a 15 stitch tube, that would be kind of a small circular project, but it could be. You would knit your 15 stitches all the way around, and when you got back, you would be here on row 2, and you would still be looking at the right side. And that would really change your pattern, because now, since we're in the round, this is not going to be a wrong side knit, it's going to be a right side purl. And so instead of having garter stitch here, I'm going to wind up with stockinette, because I'm going to knit 1 round, purl 1 round, knit 1 round, purl 1 round. You get the idea. So that's the main difference between flat charts. Flat charts are read back and forth, beginning with whatever side your number 1 is on. And in the round charts are always read from the bottom right corner, and they are always read from right to left. Keep in mind, charts can be used for other things besides stitch patterns. Charts are great for color work. You might literally just have a bunch of squares that are different colors, because maybe the entire piece of work is knit in stockinette and they're all knit stitches, and all you're really doing is changing the color. So you might see color work charts. They work great for stitch patterns as well. I usually find it easier to read a chart than written instructions. Usually. There are some exceptions to that, but I really enjoy knitting from charts, and I hope that you feel confident going forward in knitting from your charts.